You know, it's a good thing to know who you're talking to. It's a good thing to know who you're addressing. When you come to somebody and you think that they're a nobody and you start to address them in one particular way, all of a sudden you realize, oh, you get caught off guard when you realize that that person has some sort of authority, and you better watch out. I was at a pastor's conference a number of years ago now. I can't remember who the pastor was, but I'm going to steal his illustration. But he told me, he said, he says what he did, he pastored a large church, but what he did more, not for income, but as a hobby, is that he umpired baseball games, because he loved the sport of baseball. So he would umpire baseball games, and there he was, and sometimes the crowds are not very nice to the umpires. Have you ever noticed that? I remember when I used to coach Little League baseball, I'd always give a lecture to the parents. Okay, they're not in the pros yet, so calm down, okay? And certainly don't yell at the umpires. But evidently, this particular pastor was umping a game, and the coach had not given that particular lecture to those parents. And as he would call balls and strikes, he would get booed on virtually every call if it didn't go the way of the particular team. And there you would have this one woman in particular. Come on, Blue! What are you thinking? Get some glasses, figure it out. What's wrong with you? Clearly it was safe, Clearly that was a strike. Clearly that was a ball. Oh, come on now. You've seen those parents, right? Okay. It has never been me, by the way. Okay. But you've seen that, and boo and this and boo and hiss. And so finally, this pastor umpire, he finally turns around to see this loud-voiced woman, to see who she is. And lo and behold, she's a member of his congregation. Well, it gets a little bit more interesting, where he finally gets tired of it after a little bit more, and he removes his mask, and he turns towards her, and she says, "Oh, Pastor, I didn't know it was you." To which he responded, "Yes, I figured that out." It's a good thing to know who you're talking to. You need to understand who your audience is, because you don't want to look like an idiot when you speak in a way which is inappropriate to the person when you're addressing a particular type of person. You don't want to be presumptuous. You don't want to be obnoxious. It's a good thing to know who you're talking to. When we come to the book of Mark chapter 11, I'm going to start in verse 27 this morning. Let's come to Mark chapter 11, and in verse 27, and what we'll do here is we'll take a look at two different stories, squish them together because I think they belong together. And we'll look at 11:27, and we'll actually go through 12:12, because once again what we're seeing here is that Mark is setting stories, and he's setting them back to back to form a bit of a contrast. And what we'll see here is we'll see that you have people who are asking Jesus, "Who do you think you are?" And Jesus, instead of answering, he will say, "But who do you think you are?" So that's what we're going to see this morning. So we come to Mark chapter 11, verse 27. And we see that Jesus, now we saw this last week, and last week we saw that Jesus, he was cleansing the temple, or it's even more than cleansing the temple. What Jesus is doing is he's showing that he himself will be the replacement for the temple. But leaving that aside, we come into verse 27, and we see that there's an immediate reaction against what Jesus has done, and we see that people are asking, "Jesus, who do you think you are?" And they came again to Jerusalem, and as he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him, and they said to him, "By what authority are you doing these things, or who gave you this authority to do them? Who do you think you are, Jesus?" That's what they're saying, is it not? Who do you think you are to do this? Now, we see here that Mark is bringing in here in this audience, the audience of the accusers, or the audience of the people who are asking the question, the big hitters. We see here the chief priests, we see here the scribes, we see the elders, and they're coming to Jesus, and they're saying, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" And Jesus at this particular moment could have, if he wanted to, say, "Hey guys, thanks for finally asking a good question. I appreciate that." And Jesus could have said, let me explain to you who I am. I am the one who, since the time of Adam's fall, I am the one who has come, the promised one. I'm him. I am the seed of Adam. That is who I am. I am the ultimate David. I am the Messiah. I am the promised one that everybody who has been waiting for. I am the focal point of history. Thanks for asking. Could have done that, right? But that's not what Jesus does. Matter of fact, Jesus could have said, "Well, listen, hey, once again, thanks for coming. Thomas, come over here with the scrapbook. And they could have opened up the scrapbook, right? And Jesus could have said, now look right here. Now this one here, it's a little pixelated. But you'll notice here, it's a picture of me and I'm healing a leper. And if you come over here, it's a snippet from the Galilean press, and you'll see that there was a man who was lame, and his friends brought him, and they lowered him down through the roof, and I went ahead, and I made it so he could walk. Oh, and by the way, I said his sins were forgiven too. And you're probably here, I know a lot of you are here because you already know, and we know this from John chapter 11, a lot of you are here because you heard that I raised Lazarus from the dead. And right here, attached to my scrapbook here, right here on the page, is a piece of the linen cloth. Yeah, sometimes we use it as a bookmark even. And here it is, and we took that from Lazarus' burial clothes, and here it is. That's what Jesus could have done. But that's not how he answers. That's not how he answers at all. They ask by what authority. The authority should be very, very evident. Jesus has shown the signs of being the Messiah. Jesus has shown the signs of someone with extraordinary power. The works which Jesus did, the things in the scrapbook should have already pointed to him being the promised one. And yet what we see here is Jesus doesn't answer them directly. He gives them a counter question. And Jesus said to them, I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you what authority I do these things by. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? Answer me. Was the baptism of John from heaven? Now, when Jesus says heaven here, he means heaven that is the place of God. So essentially, is it from God or is it from man? That's what he's saying. This is a problem for them. Now, remember, as we stay here in the 11th chapter, I want us to go to the first chapter. Remember that John the Baptist is a major character within the Gospel of John. Matter of fact, the book of Mark starts with John the Baptist. In the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger before your face. And that messenger is John. And John, he is out there, he is baptizing people. John is the guy who is announcing that the Messiah has come, that a new prophetic era has come, that the deliverer has come. The people recognize John as a prophet. People have been going out to John to be baptized, to repent of their sins, and to be dunked into the Jordan River, identifying themselves as people who are repenters of their sins. So this is what we have at the beginning of the Gospel of John. Now as we come here to the 11th chapter, Jesus is saying, okay, I got a question for you boys. The fellow who preceded me, was he from God or was he from man? Which one? Now, I think this is interesting, the discussion which we see here. Verse 31, and they discussed it with one another, saying, if we say from heaven, that is from God, he will say, why then did you not believe him? But shall we say from man? And they were afraid of the people, for they all held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, we do not know. We do not know. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that these men, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders, are not stupid individuals. These are intelligent men. Intelligent men. Matter of fact, they can look 2 steps ahead. Let's see here. Now, if we answer this way, Jesus will do this. If we answer this way, the crowd will do this to us. We can understand a question, we can deliberate it in our minds, we can think ahead, we can anticipate. We are not stupid individuals. They're not. These are not people who do not have an education. Yet, when all is said and done, they try to find a middle road, and they say, you know what, we don't know. You know, we have seen this before. We have seen this before where people who have all kinds of evidence before them. These guys have the scrapbook of evidence. And you're saying, well, there wasn't a scrapbook there. Yes, there is. There is the reports of all the things which Jesus has done. They know, in one sense, who Jesus is. He has a resume before them. They understand it in a sense. It's just that they reject it. They reject it. That can't be. Not that Galilean preacher, that guy who comes from nobody. That guy who is not one of us, it can't be him. That can't be the Messiah. No, 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 no. We've seen it before with the rich young ruler. The rich young ruler comes and he's all excited to follow Jesus until it costs him something. These men here realize that if they decide to follow Jesus, it is going to cost them something. I'm here to tell you this morning, in the 21st century America, following Jesus is going to cost you something. Well, no, salvation's free. Yes, salvation's free. But following Jesus Christ is oftentimes costly. It oftentimes means that you follow him rather than the things of this world, and therefore that is costly. It doesn't save you, but the consequences of following Jesus sometimes will cost you. We don't know. We don't know who he is, or we don't know by what authority. And Jesus says, okay, well, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Really? Don't you know who you're talking to? Don't you know who you're talking to? You should know who you're talking to. In one sense, I think you do, but for whatever reason, though you have all of this information, and though it is in your heads, you refuse to see with eyes of faith. See, ladies and gentlemen, even today, when we talk to people, it is not enough for us to convince people intellectually that we have the right argument and that we are correct, or that the Bible is correct. We must, yes, touch the mind, but we also must exhort people to respond with their emotion and their will as well. They must fully and 100% commit themselves to Jesus Christ. Too oftentimes we make it so that it is an intellectual exercise where we're in a debate forum, and that's all we're trying to do is we're trying to hit the mind. And that there is some legitimacy to that, don't get me wrong, but we also must call people to make a decision. We must call people that to accord their will with God's will. We accept Christ through faith. And so we call people to faith. Not just intellectual assent, but faith and trust in him. Jesus doesn't bail these guys out. He doesn't say, well, that's okay, let me explain it one more time. He says, I'm just not going to tell you. You say, well, that's Jesus, tell them. No, because they have the intellectual information. They have enough knowledge. It's just they need to choose to believe. You need to know who you're talking to. It's a good thing to know who you're talking to. Jesus now makes a twist upon them. As we come into the 12th chapter, they want to know by what authority Jesus is doing things. In essence, Jesus, who are you? Now as we come into the 12th chapter, the first 12 verses, Jesus will say, but now let me tell you who you are. You want to know who I am? The evidence is clear. You don't want to listen to it. You won't accept it by faith. Fine. But now let me tell you who you are. And we come now to Mark chapter 12, and we'll look at the 12 verses which follow. We're also going to have to go to Isaiah chapter 5, okay? But bear with me. We won't go forever, I promise. And he began to speak to them in a parable, and a man, in parables. And here's the parable. A man planted a vineyard and put a fence around it and dug a pit for a winepress and built a tower and leased it to tenants, and he went into another country. Now, if you're an Old Testament scholar, if you're one of the scribes, if you're the chief priest, if you're an elder, you know exactly what he is talking about. You know what he is quoting. You know to which passage he's referring to. And some of you are today, you're like, is this from the Bible someplace? Yes, it is. This is the account of what is called oftentimes the Song of the Vineyard. And the Song of the Vineyard is in Isaiah chapter 5. So turn to Isaiah 5. And as you turn to this section, what we see that Jesus he's referring here to the Song of the Vineyard. And what he'll do is he'll refer to it, he'll allude to it, and then he'll make a twist. Okay? So it's not a perfect parallel, but it's done to draw one's attention towards a judgment section, but with a twist, okay? And I'll explain that. So go Isaiah chapter 5. And I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing. It's not too long. Let me sing for my beloved, my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. and he dug it, and he cleared it of stones, and he planted it with choice vines, and he built a watchtower in the midst of it, and he hewed out a wine vat in it. And he looked for its yield to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. Notice here that description in Isaiah chapter 5 is virtually identical with what Jesus says in Mark chapter 12. The leaders who understand the Bible understand that Jesus is referring to this. They have to understand that. And what we see here is we see this agricultural idea that an owner comes and he establishes a vineyard, and we have here an unfortunate situation, but it yielded wild grapes at the end of verse 2. Continuing on in verse 3. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done for it? When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured, and I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste, and it shall not be pruned or hoed, and briars and thorns shall be grown up. And I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold bloodshed, for righteousness, but behold an outcry. And so we see here in the Isaiah passage, we see the example of the vineyard. And in the Song of the Vineyard, what we have then is we have the vine, and the vine becomes corrupted. Corrupted so much that it cannot produce good fruit. Now as we come into Mark chapter 12, like I said, Jesus will do the same thing. He will allude to the vineyard, but there is a twist. It is not so much the vine, but it is the keepers of the vine who are the ones who will be judged. In the Old Testament, we have the vine itself as judged. Here it has the keepers of the vine. They are the ones who are to be judged. So come to Mark 12. We already read the first part. Now go to verse 2. When the season came, he sent a servant, or he sent a slave to the tenants to get from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. Now, understand the situation. The situation is this, is that you have the owner, and he has got his field. He has set up the vineyard. If you're going to have a producing vineyard, it takes some time, by the way. I mean, if you want to grow, beans, you put the beans in the ground and they grow in the same year. Wheat, same thing. But with a vineyard, it's going to take about 5 years before you get your initial crop. It takes some time. And so we have the owner, and he is established, or he has got his tenants out there. They've built things up. And now we're ready, after a long time, we're ready for a good harvest. And the owner sends the slave to finally come and to pick up some fruit from the good harvest. And in verse 3, and they took the servant, and they beat him, and they sent him away empty-handed. Get out of here. Verse 4, and again he sent them another servant, or another slave, and they struck him on the head and treated him shamefully. Notice here the progression. The progression continues to go from bad to worse. Verse 5, and he sent another, and they killed. And then it goes into generalities. And so with many others, some they beat and some they killed. And he still had one other, a beloved son, and finally he sent him, saying, they will respect my son. So over and over again he sends people to say, hey, give me the harvest, give me the harvest, give me the harvest. And he's going to the tenant farmers and says, give me the harvest, give me what you owe me. You're able to work the land, you're able to take your portion, granted, but you're to give the bulk of it to me. And what we see then is we see rebellion. The allusion is very clear, or the parable is very clear. God has sent his prophets over and over and over and over again to Israel, and they have spurned the prophet, and they have spurned the prophets, and they have killed the prophets. God, you want fruit? We don't want to give you the fruit. So finally, God comes to this crisis point, and he says, all right. And we come back into the parable, and he sends the son. He had still one other, a beloved son, and finally he sent him to them, saying, they will respect my son, because the son is the one who essentially owns it right after the father. He has a claim to it. It belongs to him. But those tenants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." And they took him and killed him, and they threw him out of the vineyard. I find this amazing in many respects, because what we have here is, once again, Jesus is prophesying his murder. Jesus understands that he is the Son. The Son comes from the Father, and now he has come, and he has come into the vineyard hoping to find a harvest. And instead what he finds is he finds rebellious tenants. And the tenants clearly here, ladies and gentlemen, are the people who are in charge of the religious systems of the times, the scribes and the Pharisees and the elders, which are mentioned already. And these are the people who are the tenant farmers, and these are the people who are eating the grapes which God has allowed to grow. And they want to give nothing to God. They want to rest upon the trappings which they get from the glorious temple. They want to be called rabbi. They want to get the respect. They want to get the financial resources. They want to use their position to rob the widows and the orphans. They want to make the profits in the temple. And the Son is to come, and their thinking is, we will kill him and then we'll get his inheritance. Now think about this for a moment. How does that work? Well, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, you've got the owner, he's a distant land, if you will, and the son comes in and they kill the son. So how is it that, I mean, is the father going to freak out so much that he's going to say, oh, well, you killed my son, so I guess I'll sign over the land and you get the land? Is that what they're saying here? Well, that's not the idea. It's more of the idea of what is legal and what is de facto. That's what you have here. Think of it this way. Up in Seattle, glorious, beautiful Seattle, you can get yourself a tent from Big Five, and you can go into any old park, and you can set yourself up, and you can live there. At the sidewalk, or under a bridge, on top of a bridge. It's nuts, okay, right? We're all praising God we're in the Tacoma area. Okay, all right. But you can take that over. That can be yours. And unless somebody is willing to get you out of there, it becomes yours. I knew a man, his name was John, and that was his first name. None of you here, obviously, okay? And back in the day, probably about 25 years ago, Seattle actually cleared out their parks, and they would give notices to people who were camping in the parks. Tomorrow we'll clear out the park. Tomorrow we'll clear out the park. So they'd let people know. And this man, John, he was a smart guy. He went and he collected all of those brochures, took them all. And then he left. And he waited for the police to come in, and they cleared all the parks, and then he moved back in. But then he had this whole stack of get out of the parks things. And so when anybody else would move close, he wanted his privacy, so he'd put a little thing next to them. That worked out really well for him. He did a good job. That doesn't illustrate my point very well. Anyway, the reality is that the land, which in an agricultural society, the value of the land is based upon the crops. And what these guys want here is that the property may not go to them as the deed will go over to them, but they get to reap the harvest over and over and over again. So therefore, they get the value of the land. If the son doesn't come, and if he can't get it, then we'll go ahead and we'll continue to get the glory of being the leaders of the religious system. What a deal. Well, what will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Judgment is coming. Judgment is coming. How dare you take the vineyard of God and to put upon yourself religious trappings and to consume what should be his harvest. No, no, no. The owner will come. And not only will he come, but he will keep his vineyard, and he will punish those who have been abusing their position. And notice this. This is interesting. This is kind of cryptic. And give the vineyard to others. Who are the others here? That's a little bit of a question, is it not? Who are the others? Again, my belief is that the Gospel of Mark is written primarily with a Gentile view in mind. And if you are a Gentile, you look at this and you say, wait a second. The vineyard then goes to others. That is, to who? To the Gentiles, in a sense? Is that what he's talking about here? And so many people, it's interesting, they say, does that mean that Israel is replaced, or does that mean that, is that what he's talking about? Well, I think the answer to that is no. Israel is not replaced. I mean, we have large sections of Scripture, and we have prophetic stuff in the Old Testament, which seems there has to be a nation of Israel that has to have fulfillment on a national level. We have Romans chapter 11, large portions of Romans chapter 11, but let me just read verse 25. Lest you, that is you Gentiles, be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. So how are we to take this? I mean, what is this idea that the vineyard is given to the others? That is, there's some sort of blessing is given to others. What does that mean? And I think what we have here, I think that the blessing here, again, as the audience is reading this, we're saying, wait a second. God's blessing, which is focused almost exclusively on Israel, we see now that there is a bit of a push. And in some sense, the Gentiles also are blessed. And I think, let me read the next verse here, because I think this helps us out a little bit as well. Because we see within more Pauline writing, we see that the inclusion of the Gentiles, a mysterious idea, shows us God's blessing to other people. Verse 10, have you not read the Scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And if we look at that, and then we scoot over to Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 20. And Paul will use the same type of terminology. We'll pick it up at verse 19. So then, you, that is, you people of a Gentile background, are no longer strangers and aliens, but are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone. And what we see here in the book of Mark is we see, at least in some sense, there is a blessing which is going to be given to other people, and certainly not to the tenants. It seems that there is an expansion of the blessing. And some people say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean does the church replace Israel? No, I don't believe that's the case. But I do believe that the church gives us at least an inauguration of what the blessing of the kingdom time will look like. Now, these guys, as they're hearing Jesus say this in verse 12, and they were seeking to arrest him, but feared the people, for they perceived that he told the parable against them. Well, no kidding. Say they left him and went away. Once again, these guys are not stupid. These guys are smart guys. They understand what Jesus is saying. They understand the implications of confessing Jesus. They understand the implications of following Jesus. They know that there's a cost, and they reject it because the cost is too high. Just like the rich young ruler, they reject him. And now as Jesus comes on to this one here, he says, you want to know who I am? I will tell you who you are. You are false teachers, and that which you have is going to be taken from you, for you are robbing God. You don't know who you're talking to. Oh, you might sort of intellectually, but you certainly don't with your will. You are not willing to follow me. As I look at this, and I think about how does this really work for us in the 21st century? How does this work? I want us to rejoice in this. Ladies and gentlemen, we do. We do know who Christ is. Not only do we know who Christ is, we can speak to him. Isn't that a marvelous thing?